Stream.
Hello, and welcome to Better Together. My name is Miracle Jones. I am the Director in Policy here at One Hood Media. We're so excited that you joined us today. And to get an overview of what's about to happen, we're going to introduce our MC, D.S. Kinsel, revolutionary artist extraordinaire from Boom Concepts, Pennsylvania's own. Blah, blah, blah. Welcome, DS.
Peace. How you doing, Miracle?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited for today's program, and because we are better together, so it's good to see all these amazing faces. What up, big brother Justin?
Am I muted? I'm good, right?
Good.
Okay, yeah.
I thought you was gonna give us some more radio voice, Justin. I want you to say something smooth. You know what I mean? You got that FM. You know what I mean? 106
right.
jams.
Yeah. No, I'm glad to be here. I'm definitely appreciative of to hear from Nino and work for the Party and Socialism and Liberation. I was appreciative when you even offered this chance, to talk about this and to bring some, I think, capitalism critical framework, socialism framework, particularly then to talk about it within the arts community, Black arts community. I'm excited to learn with everybody. So I'm just glad to be here.
So we're going to give some space for folks. Do we have I want to talk to my producer and my gentleman on the boards. 1 2 1 2, brother. Do we got music ready to rock? Yay or nay? I think that's a nay. That's a nay. Oh,
yeah.
It's all good.
But also, we do want to introduce Glashonda, who is going to be our ASL interpreter for the afternoon. So please make sure if you are watching this program with somebody who needs ASL interpretation, you are adjusting your screen appropriately so that comes through. In addition, for accessibility, Facebook and YouTube should have the live closed captioning working as well. So we are working to make this program as accessible. But we are here on the day before the anniversary of Malcolm X's passing to talk about organizing and unionizing as Black and Brown artists and creatives, and to talk about a program a little bit more to set the ground rules for this program. I'm going to hand it back to D.S. Kinsel.
So thank you again. Today is Better Together. Better Together is presented by Boom Concepts, Hillombo, and One Hood Media. Hillombo is an anti-racist and pro-Black facilitation strategy company. One Hood Media is a social justice arts collective working to use media and arts to uplift social justice. And Boom Concepts is an artist incubator and creative hub dedicated to field building, knowledge sharing, mentorship, and storytelling. And we want to give a shout out again to Glashonda and her team for today's ASL interpretation. Now, before moving forward, we want to remind all attendees that this space is dedicated to BIPOC voices and presence. We ask that folks who do not identify as such, please remove yourself from the stream or the space. If you're interested and want to learn more, please connect directly with the host organizations, Boom Concepts, Hillombo, and One Hood, and you can find out how to support and contribute to liberation and community building. But we're going to ask All non-BIPOC attendees or observers to please remove themselves from the space. All right, is it just us? Yep. All right, cool. Today's teaching or learning is dedicated to sharing knowledge and building solidarity across Black and Brown artists and creatives. Today's conversation will touch on themes of collective action and union building. Creatives and independent contractors are often the last to receive support or never receive support at all. Some of the questions we'll ask today is, how do we build power together? How do we negotiate and make demands? And what are the ways we take care of each other? Today's session has been inspired by active community conversations around the power of union building and organizing. Particularly, there is a collective of folks working around the concept of a Black artist or cultural workers union. If you're interested in joining this conversation, we'll touch on some of the topics, but please leave your information or make comment in the chat. We want to support you or anybody in your community who's using their creative intellect across skill set and disciplines. Now I'm going to move forward, introduce a good brother from Boston, Nino Brown. Nino, you there?
Peace. How you doing? How y'all doing?
Peace.
Glad to be here. Can you hear me?
You're good, bro. You good, bro. Now, I want to give you a proper introduction before you drop some knowledge on us, because you sent us that nice bio. Can I get into it?
Definitely.
Okay. Hold up. I ain't got my glasses, so I got to get close up. Nino Brown is a public school teacher, unionist with the Boston Teachers Union. He's also an organizer with Answer Coalition, an anti-racist and anti-imperialistic organization which is organized against the Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libyan wars. Nino is a member and organizer of Jericho Boston, a movement to free all political prisoners. Lastly, in our connection today, he is a member and organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, a revolutionary multinational socialist party dedicated to overturning the existing racist, sexist, and imperialistic social order and reorganizing it on a new basis with the working class in political power and the economy organized in the interest of the majority class or working with oppressed people. Now, that's a lot of jargon. That's a lot of power. And I think you're going to be able to help us understand some of your viewpoints and what brought you to a lot of this organizing. So we're going to give some hand waves, some finger snaps, some claps for the good brother, Nino Brown.
Word. Peace, y'all. So, again, glad to be here. My name is Nino. I organize with the PSL and so many other organizations, also Jericho. I want to give a shout out to the Boston Liberation Center, as well as the Greater Boston Labor Council. You know, all the labor unionists out there really fighting to end exploitation, right? To increase our wages, but also to end, the system that gives us these measly wages and has us survive in the wilderness of American capitalism. So I kind of wanted to start with just in the history of in the spirit of Black History Month, by kind of going through how I kind of came to understanding these intersections of Black labor and socialism and union politics. Really, the idea of laborers, right, uniting their ability to work, to come together. So just to reel back in time, right? Not to get all old timey, but we understand that capitalism was a system that was not born out of just the enterprising of Europeans, but it was born out of just the enslavement of Africa, South America, the Americas, and a part of that process was not just taking any old Africans, from the continent, right, but really stealing, those of us who had particular skills, whether it was growing rice, whether it was tilling the land, doing work that Europeans were not equipped to do in the United States, or in what came to be known as the United States. And I focus on that and start with that just because, when we think about Black labor today, when we think about cultural work, when we think about arts, right, we have to think about the ways in which Black people have already contributed up until this point, right? So we don't start from ground zero. We start from Paul Robeson. We start from Langston Hughes. We start from the blues. We start from these historical traditions that we all can't bring it all right here in this moment, right? But we have to understand that this is not anything new, right? And when I was invited to speak today, I had mentioned that I'm a unionist. I'm a part of the Boston Teachers Union, and in Massachusetts or in Boston, Black people have a long history of forming independent societies, right? Mutual aid societies wherein they would educate Black people. And I'm talking about the early 19th century, right? So 1800s, before slavery had ended, where we had Black people forming independent societies, whether it was around mutual aid, the education of our children, women's empowerment and leadership, Black arts, right? And the formation of Black people as a nation within a nation, because I know things are folks, everyone's attention is on Texas right now, and the ways in which we're suffering in the South, but just because we're in the North or in Boston or the Midwest, what have you, it doesn't necessarily mean that all that history is irrelevant to us, and it doesn't affect us, right? Because as Malcolm X said, if you're south of the Canadian border, then that's the South, for him. So I say all that to say in that, we have this history. We have things we can turn to, which I'll get to later, around Du Bois's conceptions of, building Black consumer societies, cooperatives, the Garveyite movement, of which, my family being from Jamaica kind of has that, that direct connection. And those are the political beliefs that I was growing up, raised in. So that's the bottom, right? That's the zero that we're starting from with all that wealth of history. So I want to go into, also a bit what I was saying before about unions and the power that they hold. And I think specifically, right, how, artists and cultural workers can form unions in ways that, break with the past, but are, instill in continuity in some ways. So one is, most of us, we grew up in the United States and we don't know, we're not told, we're not educated about labor, right? What is a labor union, right? Both of my parents were in labor unions their entire lives, and I really became hip to this idea of a union post-college, right? After I had my bachelor's degree, we're considered educated, but we're in, the country with the most violent labor history, but not any conception. We don't have any conception of what labor is or the role that it plays in history, particularly Black labor, right? So just to peel back and, kind of get this quick snippet. So labor unions in the United States, or labor in the United States, again, bloody history. When we look back at 1616 or 1619, where, this is the kind of onset of racialized capitalism. Prior to, there were indentured servitude, Black people were working alongside, European serfs, what have you. But after the creation of, race as a legal construct, the ability to form unions, the ability to struggle around labor rights becomes, there's a huge chasm there, right? And when we find ourselves today thinking about how, Black people are the first hired, or the first fired, the last hired, how, in Boston, the median family wealth of a Black family wealth is $8, according to the Federal Reserve, right? And we look at our economic predicament, and we look at, our white parallels, our white coworkers, right? They're the need for unions is because of that history that we just talked about, right? That birth of capitalism, creating that wealth that then now we have to work for in order to get back as wages. And a lot of this kind of led me to socialism, but unions as a way to build Black collective economic power from the onset of, like, let's say 1877, ending with the compromise that, ended the Civil War and, thrust Black Americans back right into the arms of the Klan, that had us even fleeing white terror, right? Internal displacement, sending us to places like Pittsburgh, places like Chicago, places like St. Louis, right? Places like Detroit, these large industrial, or formerly industrial cities, where Black people found work, right? You would be able to make a decent wage working for the post office or working for Chrysler. And I know Pittsburgh is, very deindustrialized, and like, y'all can relate to this directly. But being able to make enough wages to participate in cultural life, right? To not have to work some 10 to 12 hours a day in order to survive, to then produce culture, right? And I think the intersection here is, in talking with the folks with One Hood, and prior to coming here, when we think about Black culture, we have had all of our culture is embedded with the theory, the idea of resistance, right? I think when you look at just Black history and even the ways that it's celebrated and even co-opted today by the ruling class, by white supremacy, in order to make it into, whitewashed American history, even then, they still have to include Black resistance, right? Everything in our culture, our arts, our song, from Wade in the Water all the way to Langston Hughes' A Dream Deferred, and even beyond, right? We obviously have contemporary iterations. Shout out to No Name, all the Black artists who are really pushing the envelope, pushing the conversations and critiquing capitalism, right? We see that unions have stood aside from that cultural formation, right? So the work on the shop of earning your wages has to be directly tied to the culture of resistance, which plays out through song, resistance, arts, music, what have you. Because the only section that I think this is what I'll transition to talk about, kind of how socialism even plays a role in this, socialism or communism really, is that during the 1920s and the 30s and the 40s, right, Black arts and the artistic movement that we've created and propped up, and even that we remember today, right, at the base of it, right, you have just years of Black leftists, Black socialists, Black anarchists, communists building organizations wherein you have entire divisions, right, that can support a Black arts movement like we saw in the 20s, right? A Harlem Renaissance, where we had things that, in my hometown in New York City, the Slave Theater in Harlem, which, it put on, a litany of Black arts, radical and non-radical, right? And has that history of being started by Black communists, right? I really want to encourage folks to check out this text. Just finished reading it. It's called Black Communists in Harlem During the Great Depression, right? Where in Harlem, we see that people like Louise Thompson Hicks, we see people like Claude McKay being flown to the Soviet Union, right? Nothing really mentioned about Claude McKay in Black history, or Langston Hughes being flown to the Soviet Union to produce films, right? To popularize Black oppression. These things are things that maybe seem alien to us, right? But I focus on them, and I think we need to focus on them today because our labor movement, it fights for wages and it fights for our survival, right? But what the gap has been is connecting that culture of resistance to the base of unionized workers today, which are Black workers, right? To fuse, right? To have real intersection, fusion politics between the fight for survival, but also the fight for culture. And I think just to maybe not completely segue, but to focus on how in the same period that Black arts had this basis, was destroyed, from obviously, the war on drugs, the counter-revolution that Black people have gone through, which wasn't just, the destruction of, the organizations like the Black Panther Party. I'm pretty sure if folks are aware of the film Judas and the Black Messiah that just came out, which, I mean, I think we can have a conversation about that. I'm definitely curious about the questions. Oh, sorry. But people still hearing me? Am I all set? Okay, word. Yeah. That these films, they talk about the organizations like the Black Panther Party. We have films recognizing, Black Wall Street, even 3 years ago now, with the film The Black Panther, based off of the comic book, right? All of these, even Hollywood has to address some type of resistance culture within it. So how do we tap into that, right? That spirit of resistance, which has been igniting rebellions, right? And I think it was last year, this past summer, in over 60 countries, right? In over 60 countries, there were Black Lives Matter rebellions or solidarity actions held with the rebellions that are happening in the United States, right? So a lot of folks want to see Black people win, right? So now within the United States, how do we tap into that raw energy that exists among our people and internationally, fuse it with the struggle for unions, with the struggle for wages, with the struggle for survival, right, in ways that do not reproduce the same logic that put us in this first place and put us in this situation in the first place, right? Our RE capitalism, because we've seen, I mean, my experience, the rise of the nonprofit, what has been called the nonprofit industrial complex, at the same time that we've had these institutions under attack and co-opted. So in the 1960s, post-1965, we have the Civil Rights Act. We also have the emergence of Black studies, the emergence of the revival of this idea that we can be Black capitalists, right? Which, seems like an idea that may have come from Black people themselves, right? But historically, the record is clear. That was Nixon, right? It was Richard Nixon who said, okay, I'm going to attack the union movement. I'm going to attack the New Left. I'm going to attack the Black the Black revolutionary movement in this country, and understanding that you can't just attack things and leave a void. The concoction is Black capitalism. The concoction is the myth of Black buying power, and also institutions that we're still dealing with today, namely the nonprofit industrial complex, right? I'm not sure if folks are, who are tuning in are aware of, Black Lives Matter and some of the issues and news around, splits happening, internal division, right? And, when the rebellions that kickstarted Black Lives Matter began in 2014, coming out of Ferguson and the murder of Michael Brown, we saw that, nonprofits, they seized upon that opportunity, right? It's a movement history that, has to be revisited to understand how do we move forward today, right? How do we not make the same mistakes that were made not just 50 years ago, but literally 5 years ago, right? Where nonprofits came in and, I know some of these folks like D. Ray McKesson, who's run for mayor, came up out of Teach for America, which is really a part of the problem. They come down like, as some Ferguson activists would describe that I've met as helicopter activists, right? They helicopter in, they have their fancy nonprofit with all the funds and their 501(c)(3) status to collect all these, these millions of dollars that are being pumped in by, corporations themselves, individuals. And we get to a point where we have a nonprofit infrastructure, right? But then on the ground in Ferguson, we still have no justice, right? So there's a clear disconnect between the amount of money that's being spent, or the expenditure on, anti-racism, fighting the good fight, what have you, but then a disconnect with actually translating that into movement gains and social gains for Black people, right? For Black working class people in Ferguson, in Baltimore, in Boston, in Pittsburgh, what have you, right? And just tie it back to that history, because in the 20s and 30s, when Claude McKay was writing, if we must die, right, let it not be like hogs, with our backs pressed to the wall, right? When he's writing these poems and producing this radical culture, right, it was in direct continuity and connection with organized political formations, whether it be the African Blood Brotherhood, the Communist Party, the National Negro Congress. And today we have to ask ourselves, right, as workers, right, and particularly cultural workers, right, where is our culture in connection to political formation, right? Because we cannot separate politics from economics. We can't say, oh, well, we're going to economically develop and then we'll get some political advancement and political rights, because the political rights that we would even need to economically develop would be, used against us, so we would not develop, right? It's a classical, Du Bois versus Booker T. Washington argumentation that, I think it was really a dead end. So where we are today, and, not just to lose sight of that history, where we are today with the nonprofit industrial complex, and thinking critically and radically about how do we build cultural unions, right? Artists unions that are not, siloed, but are directly connected to the labor movement. I have some suggestions that I've seen, in my union, but also across, the United States history and the contemporary period, where we've seen that, unions have signed on to do, the rest of my union has signed on to do this thing called the Black Lives Matter Week of Action, right? Where the union has a week of action where we actually try to tie the work that we do as teachers, right, as cultural and educational workers, to resistance, right? Unabashedly. We've been attacked by it. The Boston Patrolmen's Union, so-called union, the police department, penned, a letter to us 2 years ago saying, how dare we celebrate Black lives? This is disrespectful to police. But these are the, these are the type of obstacles that we know and we expect to face, and as we attempt to do this, right? I'm definitely curious if folks have questions here. Right. Folks have questions here, but I know folks are definitely thinking about the ways in which we can innovate from the donor class, from the philanthropists who do provide funding for some of these, social formations, nonprofits, 501c3s and 4s, that we're able to do our work and quite frankly survive, right? There is some tension, to not bite the hand that feeds us, right? But I think it's here that we can think, that we can combine our efforts and move beyond the paradigm of just trying to survive, right? But trying to actually make the political what's the word I'm looking for here? Make the political impacts that would affect. Make the political impacts, right, in legislation, in policy that would allow nonprofits, right, to work directly with unions, and not necessarily have to be what's the word, stymied, muzzled, right? So I'm not sure if folks have questions there, but
so first of all, just thanks. There's a lot of great comments in the chat about this. So, and folks, please feel free to put questions in the chat or comments or suggestions. I think I jumped in too quickly. I think what we were going to do, Nino, was we were going to do a quick video. You had made a reference to Fred Hampton, and actually we were going to do this video and come back real quick. So I'm gonna get out. Let's get out of the way, and I think DS has something for us.
Definitely.
I did have something, but you queued it up, big bruh. So we're gonna give our brother Nino a breathing break. Let him get a sip of water. And we, it was referenced the Fred Hampton movie that's out right now, and talking about creative representation of our leaders and our elders and our legacy icons. Here is Fred Hampton, a short video, it's 3 minutes long, just talking about building revolutionary programs. So we could cue it up, big bro on the boards, and I'm gonna turn my mic off, my video and mic off.
A lot, and I can see what you're saying about the anarchy and the whole trip about that with the STS, and yet, like, you and the people around you seem to be like always in danger. You could be killed as you walked out of here, because this happened to a lot of people in the Black Panthers and all the black movements. And like, can you be sure that your movement, are you strong enough now, that are you going to go on? Is the Black Panthers, if you are killed, will the breakfast program go on just on a day-to-day type level?
Well, last year we started 3 Breakfast for Children program. This year we gave those 3 to the people, and they're running those Breakfast for Children already.
And people.
Right. And our whole program is geared toward educating the mass of the people. And that free health clinic that we have, the people in the community are going to run that clinic. And after a while, we're going to give them that clinic, and we're going to move on to higher levels, because we understand the difference between the vanguard and the people. We're not going to practice imperialism. We're going to keep out there setting up some new examples, some new revolutionary programs that the people can basically relate to, because basically people are progressive and basically people are revolutionary. We're not worried about them killing anybody, because I think that, they jailed Huey P. Newton, and they ran Cleve out the country, Elvis Cleve out the country, and they jailed Bobby Seale, and we got David Head up there now, who's very capable, most capable of running the Black Panther Party, and they can just take all of them they want to. We're always going to have someone to fulfill that position, because that's the type of organization the Black Panther Party is. We don't produce buffoons, we produce leaders. And everybody in the Black Panther Party, on any type of cadre, he's becoming a leader. We can, our minister, Deputy Minister of Health in the state of Illinois, can run the Black Panther Party, and so can anybody on this cadre. So all that they're involved in is an excursion in futility, because anybody that tries to deal with wiping out the leadership of the Black Panther Party is dealing with a time wasting. It's a futile effort to seize some type of power that can never be seized, because it's a type of flowing power, and there's a type of unending flow of this power. Every time somebody moves, we're just producing more and more people, And you know how the story goes. They had a chance. Wiping out power is what's got them in the mess they're in now. Wiping out power that's what's got the Black Panther Party on their asses, because they wiped out so much power. So I think they're about tired of wiping out power. They wiped out Martin Luther King, and they wiped out Malcolm X, you know what I mean? And they wiped out all these people. These people were produced. So I think that in the near future, you'll see programs initiated by the government that they'll probably have the CIA protecting people like us. Because when they wiped out Huey P. Newton and Elvis Cleaver popped up, I know very well that they said, we wish to God that we had kept Huey P. Newton on the scene, because this motherfucker's out of his mind.
Right on. Shit.
Well, right on. I don't know if Justin, if you're there, but
yeah, I don't know if you had anything to say to that, or I had a question, but I wanted to give you space if you wanted to react to that at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think Hampton is saying, I think it's essentially the spirit of what we're saying here, right, is that with cadre formation, right, where we have people who are trained as professional revolutionaries to see beyond the confines of the work that we're put in, right? So where Hampton's breakfast programs and the serve the people programs, right? I think as Hampton, said, that we have to take the people's consciousness to a higher level to the point where they see the system itself as the problem, but also not as the problem itself, but also that capitalism is not the answer, right? Hampton was an unabashed socialist, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things I was wondering what you had mentioned, the nonprofit industrial complex. And, you know, when Fred Hampton there is talking, you know, he's talking about the state, you know, that I know that the PSL, the Party for Social Liberation, talks about, and some other folks here, like the Abolitionist Law Center, talk about like the role of the state, you know, and I just wonder, this oppressive, repressive group, you know, that kind of like has this you know, this whether it's police or FBI or, you know, this huge impact on movements. And you know, when you were mentioning artists with the work with the WPA program in the 30s, and you know, at some point you had like federal money for artists, right? And in the world that you work in education, right, which the state has some money for, right? But artists in this country, there's almost, you know, the NEA's budget is like the National Endowment for the Arts budget is like 130 million, and the National Science Foundation is like 7.1 billion. So art and culture workers are basically out trying to figure out, if you don't make it big, the economy basically goes right back to the nonprofit industrial complex and the patron class or the capital class. So artists are in the nonprofit world are some of the ones who are most directed to that group of people. Yeah. Because there almost is no federal money in that thing, not like education or social services or a bunch of other areas. And I just wonder what you think about that, and you know, what's up with that? Why is that? Why are our artists linked so closely with that group? And what strategies you have about that, and or any thoughts or reactions you have to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing you said about the state, I think is right on, is that, you know, the state, for folks who you know, well, the PSL, we define the state as a repressive apparatus or repressive organization of armed people, right, to enforce the political rule of a particular class, right? So it often takes the form of the police, the prisons, what have you, but also the state is not just a repressive apparatus, right? No ruling class, no one who's ever ruled can just rule by might alone, right? You have to rule by the power of consent, right? The consent of the governed. And in order to generate that consent, this is where, you know, the counter cultural wars that, you know, we've been in since the 1970s and on, you know, whether it's I mean, Hampton also said, you know, political power doesn't grow out of the sleeve of a dashiki. And I say that while I have a dashiki on, but, you know, understanding that the seizure of, you know, Black culture and then repackaging it and then selling it back to us, right, does not elevate our conscience. And who controls the culture that is produced? Because the culture that the Panthers was producing and other formations, it was not controlled by the state. It was anti-state. It was anti-capitalist. And today, I mean, we obviously are not in a revolutionary time as Hampton was. You know, Hampton lived during the time of African decolonization, right, where there were real, actual, living, breathing revolutions that were happening on the continent and elsewhere that, you know, provided a context for people to imagine differently. Today, we're, you know, dealing with Biden and Trump and fascism and counter-revolution. So I think it's necessarily defensive, the fight that we're engaged in. Now, just because we're on the defensive doesn't mean that there aren't cracks and crevices where we can go on the offensive. I think one particular area where we can go on the offensive is in Boston, as a case study, as an example, we have this program called the Payment in Lieu of Taxes, where these nonprofit institutions, whether it's Harvard, whether it's MIT, whether it's Boston Medical Center, all of them are supposed to pay taxes, right? The state, again, is supposed to, you know, take taxes from them because they're nonprofit agencies, and that's the negotiation that was bargained, agreed upon, right? Now, for the last 5+ years, hundreds of millions of dollars have accumulated in unpaid, right, taxes through this program, payment in lieu of taxes, payment in lieu of taxes, right? So the mayor the governor has the political power to tap into that wealth and redistribute it. Obviously, the mayor's not going to do that. Mayor Marty Walsh, if folks don't know, he's tapped to be Biden's labor secretary. And I can tell you, as someone who's been in the labor movement for the last 5 years and under his governorship, I mean, we shouldn't expect much. But I think a strategy that we have to look at is how do we control the flow of revenue? How do we create political movements, right? It's not going to be an economic argument. It's not going to be a reform movement, right? It's going to be a revolutionary movement that reform is the concession that they have to make because they have to make it, right? Yeah. I'll just finish up by saying that, with what you're saying about the survival programs in Hampton and the film that's been produced today, Hampton was a community builder, right? I think within the Black community, we have, we have talent. We have people who are, I'm from New York City, people who are playing on the subways, right? We have people who, are underemployed, people who go to college and study, art, music therapy, what have you, and are now forced to turn to the nonprofit industrial complex, sometimes and self-employ themselves. And I think this is where we have to talk about, the critical formation of unions and reconceptualization of what is a union, that's not necessarily recognized by the National Labor Relations Board, but is a union and serves the political purposes that we need as a people, right? So
that's great. Well, we got some good questions here in the chat too. So I want to read one here. This is from Carl Redwood Jr. And is that what is the relationship between changing the world and changing ourselves? Role of art and artists.
I mean, in my experience, and I'll say what I learned from Fred Hampton Jr. I was at this. I think I might have been like 18 or 19 years old. I was in New York City at this place called the Breck Forum, and Fred Hampton Jr. flew in to walk us through a workshop, and came to the point where someone asked a similar question, right? And he said, well, people get involved in movements that are larger than themselves out of either aspiration, inspiration, or desperation, right? Either we aspire to be something greater, right, that we've been raised up in, or we're inspired by someone else, or we're in situations that are just so desperate that we have no other option but transformation and but movement forward. So for me, I think it's dialectical, right? You can't wait until you're completely transformed, until you're completely healed, and this maybe might ruffle some feathers of folks who are really radical proponents of this notion of self-care, which I think has been co-opted. I think Audre Lorde was suffering from cancer, was dying when she said, self-care is a radical act. Not to diminish that, right? But to give some context, in that, yeah, we have to walk the road and build it at the same time because we have no other choice, right?
Yeah. So yeah. And that's so interesting. I have thoughts, but there's also questions here in the chat still. So Lakeisha Wolf said, "Can you speak to the project with knowledge about it?"
Yeah. I think so. I mean, I'm more of the Boston Ujima Project, and the idea of, I'm supportive of all endeavors of Black people to try to, build wealth collectively, to try to govern that wealth collectively. I think I come out of the Marxist tradition, and I don't want to be too critical, but Walter Rodney actually wrote an essay on Ujima itself, and counterposing that with scientific socialism. So I have some friends who work for the Ujima Project and adjacent, and I think it's a good endeavor. I think for me, what is I guess what I'll say critical is that consumption does not generate capital, right? So we can consume goods and exchange values, our money for a commodity, right? But that doesn't necessarily generate the type of capital that will be needed to invest in Black communities across the country or a nation, right? As Black people are as a distinct nation within a nation, which doesn't mean that we shouldn't do Ujima, or we shouldn't do things like Cooperation Jackson. What I'm saying though is that in the final instance, right, the rules of capital and capital accumulation are so strapped against us that without a political fight, without a class struggle, without a struggle for the transformation of the entire economy, right, bereft of that, we'll be left with trying to pass, just, which is, I think, is another mythology, but pass the buck, right? And just by saying, well, we need to just consume collectively more and keep the wealth within the community. But how do you do that in the context of global capitalism, right? So I'm aware, I have friends and comrades who, are engaged in these type of endeavors, and I support them. I think, my role and the role of the PSL is to, wage a class struggle in such a way that these two, like I said, can really fuse and merge. Because in the 1920s and 30s, they did fuse and they did merge, and they produced the magnificent, or not magnificent, I'll take that back, produced the dilapidating social welfare that we have today.
I think there's, and I just want to make another comment again for folks who don't know that this is a Black space. So if you don't, please leave. But I wanted to, there's some kind of feedback here. Do you hear that? There's some kind of echo. You hear a little bit? Okay. So, you mentioned this thing about there is people, you need to generate consent, right? You can't do things just with repression, right? And some people might call that like ideology. You have to build some kind of ideology that people will subscribe to that actually is its own oppression, right? So it looks like this is your own idea, but really it's an idea of that serves the ruling class, and that's essentially what's happening. And I wonder if you might talk about what you think around, again, you mentioned the nonprofit industrial complex and the way it might generate ideology, and in that ways be an actual another state apparatus, right? In what ways is the nonprofit industrial complex, do you think we should look at that actually as an expression of the state, and that we actually then, and I'll give you more specific here, maybe even a thought. So I used to work as a program officer for the Heinz Endowments. And one thing I noticed was the ways in which proposals generate a lot of narrative around the needs of Black people, the way that you need to go and help these folks. It also has a way of normalizing the idea that there's a very wealthy group of people that you would ask for money, and in some ways that in itself is separating the role of capital from the problem, because it's as though these problems are coming from somewhere else, they're not from the structure, right? And so I guess I'm just curious if you might dig into that thing about like how there's more than repression, there's something else going on, and how that might show up in the arts sector. If you have any opinions about that, whether in Boston or wherever you see it.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I organize with Jericho, and we do ask for grants from time to time. So I'm familiar with that process of having to tell a story, paint a narrative. And I think you're spot on in that it is I would say a shadow state apparatus, because the typical social functions of the state, the welfare functions, all those are eradicated. Coming out of Reagan's counter-revolution in the 1980s, neoliberalism, right, privatization, the cutting of all social safety nets. That is statecraft, right? What's also statecraft is allowing corporations to not pay taxes or as a better to, instead of paying taxes, create a nonprofit where you pay 1 to 5% of the taxes that you would have paid, and you are able to be tax exempt and essentially give through grants, give sums of money to needy populations that would not need or would not have that need if you had paid your taxes in the first place, right? So it's a really kind of disgusting feedback loop. We're not paying our taxes, so we're going to create nonprofits to then address the issues of us not paying taxes, right? And not to whittle it all down to just taxes, right? But as a public school teacher, where for 5 years we've seen cuts and cuts and cuts, teachers are gone, programs are gone, arts, culture out of our schools, right? Eradicated for science, math. In this forward march of new capitalist modernization of global competition, we have to compete with China, we have to compete with Russia, and then we can't engage in arts and culture if we have to compete, right? And this is how these corporations, how they think. So I think we have to look at it as a shadow state apparatus, right? Because the ideology is based off of the deserving poor, right? How can you prove that you are poor enough or deserving enough vis-a-vis other poor and oppressed people, right, in competition with them for this pot of money that exists because of the fundamental structure of inequality. So I think within the I think folks who are in nonprofits have run up across that glass ceiling, politically and economically. In Boston, we luckily have the Haymarket People's Fund, which is a fund that donates explicitly to political movements like Jericho, where a movement to free political prisoners. Hopefully, with the Fred Hampton, the Judas film out, hopefully that movie, to me, I don't want to make it all about the movie, but we have people who are in prison because of what was depicted on the screen. Like, we have people who are in prison for 40 plus years. And now Hollywood is saying, yeah, we know that it was a whole inside job, right? And anyways, Jericho, we're able to ask for funds. And they, Haymarket recognizes that because they exist outside of those logics and those structures.
That's great. Well, we're going to take a little pause. We've been talking, and I'm going to bring Diaz back in. I think Diaz got some ideas for, just to get some other things going here. So Diaz, you want to come in here with what you were going to do?
One moment, I'm on the boards, Justin. One moment. Breaker 19.
Okay, you're okay. We'll take one other. I want to keep checking for the chat, y'all, so you guys can ask your own questions. But I'll say something though about what Diaz said in the beginning, which is that. Well, actually, I'm not going to. I'm going to take Celeste Taylor's question. So Celeste Taylor asked, are large acquisitions of land one of the key ways to pave the way for more healthy and socially democratic organizations?
I encourage folks to check out this text, Jared Ball's The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. I think some 90% of the land in this country, 90 plus, I don't know the exact statistics, but the majority of this land in this country are owned by white people. And, in order for us to acquire land, we have to buy it from somebody. And I mean, to I guess speak directly to, I guess, paving the way for more social democratic organizations. I mean, I think anytime we're in a position where we have to buy the crux of what we need to, build progress from our enemies, from the capitalists, from large landowners, which, in this day and age are really white monopolists, white wealthy folks. I think we're not really in a position where we can reliably build a strategy on that. Not that, we shouldn't acquire land where we can, but just the objective conditions are most land is owned by white folks. And if they want to sell it to us, they will. If they don't, then there's not really much we can do about that. I have a comrade from South Africa where in the post-apartheid period where they had this willing seller, willing buyer program where the South African government would buy land from white South African settlers, to then redistribute. And I mean, the white landowners didn't want to sell their land. The government was like, we'll buy you out, and they're like, we're racist. We're not selling you our land. So
Yeah.
we can't rely on that.
And I think, but we can actually dig in this a little bit more. We're going to take we're going to take a 5-minute break where people can go ahead and get some water, stretch, and then we get back. I think we can dig into some of these questions a little bit more. The chance I think that we have with Brother Nino here, I feel like, is to explore some of these problems from like a Marxist lens or a socialist lens. Like what are the different kind of offerings that are out there and how we think about these issues, so we could, look at them closely, interrogate them, and continue. So it's been great. We appreciate it, Nino. I don't know, Miracle, if you were going to say something, but I'll hand it back to you.
Yes, while we do this quick little bio break, we know this is like a heavy topic. And again, with Blackness, there's joy and pain. We're going to talk about like all that. And so while Nino and Justin go off camera, we're going to play this little clip from 2008. Again, we do not own the rights to this video, but this is a political commentator and comedian, Dick Gregory, who's going to talk about some challenges and thoughts of the state of the Black Union. Again, this video is from 2008, and as a lot of our elders, they have the foresight to talk about issues back in the day that are still relevant. And so we want to bring a little bit of joy and laughter, some humor, some adult humor into this conversation. So as Nino and Justin go off camera, and I go off camera as well, we're going to play the video, and we again thank our interpreters who are signing for the video. And we will, at the last 20 minutes of this presentation, we're actually going to talk about some Black organizations that you can get involved in. And one of the organizations is this Black-led accessibility organization that Gloshonda is running. So without further ado, please watch this video of comedian Dick Gregory.
But first, let me forget the intellectual stuff right now, which I love. And I've got to get down to some personal business, which you'll probably find out about after we leave here. I was standing back in the back waiting to come on when you had your sponsors out here. So when they came by, they passed me, and I did say something to them. And I know they're going to tell you. See, I thank the white dude from Walmart for my cousin. This past Christmas, they had prices so low, he didn't have to shoplift. Now, I know they're going to tell you. Yeah. The brother that passed by from ExxonMobil. Now, a lot of people don't know. They had gift packages for us, and they had an ExxonMobil credit card for gas. Right. I gave him mine back because I said every time I go to Exxon and buy gas, I love water. A gallon of water costs more than a gallon of gas. Can you give me a water card? Yeah. And I'll be honest, the black brother from Wells Fargo, head of the mortgages, I pulled him over and said, I need to talk to you. He said, Brother Greg, you need a mortgage. I said, no, they took my house when times was good. No mortgage. So here's what I asked him. Yes, sir. I asked for a loan and a cosigner to open up a black business. I want to open up a black airline named Tamika Air. And my motto will be, we leave late, but we get you there on time. Okay? And I Airlines, we'll be the only one can say we guarantee we won't lose your luggage because you can't bring none with you. And we're going to be a good Christian airline. We ain't selling no alcohol on the plane. You bring your own, we just sell the setup. That's it. So I just want it. That's all. Now to my mayor, Mr. Mayor. I just want you to know how bad things are. When you said Chocolate City, I had just walked in the hotel room. I was in Europe and turned on the news, and I heard you say Chocolate City. I thought you was talking about Hershey, Pennsylvania. And then I heard all the white folk complaining about you call this town Hershey, Pennsylvania. Look, all my life, they've called this town Sin City, and nobody cares. You hear me? Nobody cares. Nobody. Sin means evil, deceitful, nasty, ungodly, unspirited. When you said chocolate means love, kindness, tastes good, is good. Huh? So do color matter? Let me tell you something. I had a dream last night. Now, I'm 75 years old. I dreamed I saw God. Now, being 75, I said, excuse me, Mr. God. Can I have a word with you? He said, yes, my son. I said, you know, they just had a Polish pope. Will we ever get a black pope? He said, yes, my son, but not while I'm God. So, brother,
sorry. Welcome back. And so we wanted to show the video again, give people a couple moments to do a bio break, but to think about the ways in which we use art to share a story, to call people and power, to use truth to call people in power to reconsider the ways they engage and talk with each other. And so bringing Brother Nino back and Brother Justin, we're going to continue some of these conversations. It's really funny, you know, Dick Gregory. I think that I never got a chance to actually physically see him in person, but if you ever to watch some of his specials and his shows, he had this unique talent to weave this story and to take you along with them for the ride, but to, at the end of the day, remind you that it is your job to push back against, you know, anti-Black power, and to remember to love and laugh with your community, and that's going to get you through. And so to continue on this conversation, we're going to bring in back, welcome back, Brother Justin and Comrade Nino.
Yeah, I'm sorry about this echo. I need to get headphones somehow. I'll keep my speaking to that minimum. You know, one of the things that we wanted to talk about, and we're going to leave some time, y'all. Hopefully, again, keep putting questions in the chat. And then also we're going to leave time at the end, and probably about 20 or 25 minutes or so for people to start kind of like sharing some of their projects. So we want to leave time for you to share what you're doing. I saw Cheryl already shared a piece about the Black Worker Center. And so we want to use it as an organizing time period itself, right? So we just don't want to talk about the topics. We also want to actually use this time. So one of the things that Daryl mentioned at the outset was a few of us have been talking around how it would be to organize in a union, a collective, you know, of culture keepers and artists and culture workers and all of us who work in this space. And it goes back, I think, to a comment you made about biting the hand that feeds you. And essentially, again, like I said, from my experience, I used to manage nonprofit organization, then worked in a foundation. And then it seems to me in many ways in Pittsburgh's nonprofit art sector, in some ways, the foundations end up being some kind of employer in a way. They're removed, they're not directly who you work for, but in some time, you're still aware of their influence and there is, but you don't have the same thing like you have, again, like in a hospital where you work for the hospital, the workers organize as a union and they have clear management. And in the Black arts, nonprofit arts community, only one organization, maybe two, well, one has one, have budgets over $500,000. So for the most part, management and artists are the same people, right? Like people who start their organization are their own managers. And so I guess I'm just, we've been thinking we want to have conversations with people who are interested in having this conversation. Please say so in the chat. We've got a document that we're going to be sharing with people and talking to people, get their feedback on to see what they think about this. But just wondering, I guess, I feel like you're suggesting being careful about just unionizing and reproducing. Like you could argue that many of the unions have they've just tried to get a bigger share of this overall system, and they've also been racist in the way they operated. What's your opinion about unions that you think do not reproduce capitalism? How are they run differently? How are they thought about? What would be things you'd be looking for, suggestions you'd make about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a big topic, and I think historically, one is the IWW, the International Workers of the World. They were a union movement that was, decidedly multinational. So they organized Black and white workers and women when most unions were racist, sexist, barring them. So I think there's not that that's a model of how they organized, right? But that we're again like not starting from zero. And I think as an educator, I think of like not necessarily what is the answer, but how do we get to the answers? And I think that history of Black IW organizers and workers forming unions, that the logic of it was contra state, contra capitalism. I think with these nonprofits that essentially do end up becoming employers, where we've been given, or at least I was raised with the idea that they're fighting the system, that they are resisting. Some of them are even called resist, like, no shots fired, but some of them are, the rhetoric and the aesthetics are there, but the social relationships, right? What we'd call as socialists, the relations of production, right? How are we relating to each other to produce, whether it's a commodity or a service or a good? And I think it's here where the same logic and relationship of the nonprofit, of the business sector, can get reproduced. Because, like you said yourself, you were a director of a nonprofit, and I'm pretty sure you can relate to the amount of stress and duress that's put upon nonprofit workers, nonprofit managers to meet either these narrow deadlines, these narrow confines of what is acceptable resistance. At the same time, fight to resolve the issue, resolve the contradiction, whether it's mass incarceration, whether it's housing, whether it's education. At some fundamental level, if the issue is resolved, then the nonprofit that is supposed to address the issue is no longer needed, right? So there's not really it'll be hard pressed to get the nonprofits to organize to their own demise, right? And not to say the Panthers have an answer for everything, but again, a model, because they were able to organize, youth centers, community centers, free health clinics, sickle cell anemia testing centers, free ambulance services, on top of breakfast, education for children, all of this, right? All of this was maybe 10, 20 years before the nonprofit industrial complex really begins to make its become institutionalized, like we said, as a shadow state formation, right? While we have Fred Hampton and all the Black revolutionaries, they've been either thrown into prison or they have been killed, right? Uh, their ideas are not dead, right? And the nonprofits attempt to fill this void, right, with the aesthetics, but then the actual ways that they related, right, the social relationships, they're not reproduced, right? The Panthers would collect funds from the community in order to organize their programs, because once there are links attached or umbilical cords with philanthropists who are essentially your employers and they can control your conditions of work, once that relationship is really cemented, right, and there isn't like a community alternative or independent way to raise funds that is dependent on those who buy into the union, right, those who are participants, artists, but also community members themselves who are also workers and are part of other unions. Unless there's some avenue towards relation to that base, I think there really isn't much promise for trying to not reproduce that logic.
As and again, I'm going to see if there's any other questions there in the chat here. Not yet so far. One of the things I guess that I'll say also I wonder about though is if you think about unions organizing and then dealing with management and getting negotiated deals, right? Then what about the ways in which artists and people in the nonprofit sector generally, right, might organize to take another step, right? To say, for example, what are some kinds of let's say building greater accountability, let's say to a philanthropic sector or the state funding sector or individual donors or corporations, but trying to create some kind of steps, right? I guess I just wonder what you think about can people, if unions generally are negotiating deals, right? They're not getting complete ownership there of the company. Often they're trying to improve their situation. Is there anything between grants or sellouts? Because earlier you said your own organization gets some, right? They're just sellouts, and that's all that there is, or that they're or you're completely tied to them, right? What do generally, and I guess what I'm curious about the PSL, what do you all think about like this idea of some kinds of radical reforms that have germs of a future situation, but they are a desired middle step? But you've agreed, what is the criteria that actually makes this not just some reproduction of the same situation? And I don't know what PSL thinks about that. I know, and I'd appreciate your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So I mean, we have comrades in some 90 cities across the country. So I mean, it looks different, in different situations or country or cities. In Boston, what we've done is we're launching this Boston Liberation Center, where we work with. We have to, work with the city government, in order to set up shop, so to say. And I think just to speak to some of the comments around like, real world examples. So that's in Boston. In Philadelphia, we have a Philadelphia Liberation Center. In New York, we have the Justice Center in El Barrio. And, like I said, 90 cities across the country. So it looks different in different, circumstances. And the point of these centers is to, fight for these reforms that give us teeth, right? Reforms that allow us to leapfrog onto the next struggle, right? So case in point, we have comrades who are writing or working for the 515 campaign, and it's $15 and a union, right? Because with $15 alone, I mean, you can just get fired, right? But with a union, right, now you're able to actually leapfrog and continue to build worker power to demand $20, $25, what have you. Within Boston, like I said, we work with Jericho, Also, the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. And folks can research that and look that up. We're trying to build a branch here where we have building trades, construction workers, Black workers. We have Black teachers. We have Black plumbers, right? Building a coalition of Black trade unionists that can support community endeavors to, as a socialist, I will say, you can only expand so much before you have to have socialism, right? That's for us, that's the answer, right? Without you can only have so much radical reform within capitalism. Capitalism can only sustain so much. I often say that with the New Deal, the proverbial rabbit that was pulled out of the hat, the magic to save us from revolution, that can't happen anymore. It's the Green New Deal can only happen with a revolution, with socialism. The solutions to the problems that we face as Black people can only be finally resolved when we have social, political, economic power. Because in the meantime, we're negotiating. And for us as the PSL, in every single step of that negotiation, we think about ways that the reform, whether it's, $15 in a union, or whether it's in the Boston Teachers Union, where we have Black Lives Matter Week of Action, where we have demands for ethnic studies. We demand, I think it's some $60 million to be defunded from the police department, right? So that $60 million can be used to build ethnic studies programs for K through 12, where we're going to find our next Fred Hampton. We're going to find our next Assata Shakur, right? Because, like I said, we have a lot of talent, ingenuity, organizing energy, raw energy in our community, but we have these nonprofits and we have these ideological distractions that put us into reformist dead ends, as opposed to what you said of radical reform, right? Where the step 10 is in step 1, right? It's embedded within every single step that we take, but that can only be done consciously. We're not gonna spontaneously get there.
Right. Yeah. And I think that this idea, so you have to be intentional. Celeste Taylor has a question here. The IWW tried to organize a food co-op in Pittsburgh a few years ago and lost by 1 vote. And I learned about how many progressive people are not always in favor of union organizing or socialism. And I'd like to hear more about how we can fuse these kinds of realities together. And you can see this here. I'll be quiet because I echo.
Yeah, definitely. Progressive people are not always in favor of unionizing or socialism. Bottom line, working without spending much energy on discussing the means. I mean, one thing I will say is that the IWW today is, and no shots fired, but like the IWW today is not the IWW of the 20th century, where they were doing industrial organizing, where they would organize on an industry-wide basis. In the IWW today, is a lot weaker of an organization, but also the political tendency and trend that they represent has become more, lifestylist. Like, change your lifestyle as a revolution, as opposed to making revolution is my lifestyle, right? I think when progressive folks are, not in favor of socialism, I mean, I'm not too taken aback, given that anti-communism is the unofficial religion of the United States, right? I mean, we learned about Langston Hughes, Claude McKay, Frida Kahlo, Pablo Picasso, Albert Einstein, but somehow we don't learn that they're communists. We don't learn that they're socialists at all, right? We learn that, Malcolm X, Dr. King, right? We learn about these people, but we don't learn about the socialism. So if people are afraid of socialism, that's because of, the reasons that we spoke about with the killing off of our leaders, right? It's like that's the political result of that. As far as getting folks to an understanding of what socialism is today, unionization is the school of socialism, right? You see the real tangible results of collective power, whether it's, grocery store workers, teachers, right, to bargain for the benefits and for the gains that we demand, right? Because as individuals going to the employer, as individuals going to the philanthropists, what have you, they recognize that our labor power, our ability to work, right, in this small unit, it's replaceable, right? They can say, oh, well, Nino, if you don't want to work for this nonprofit, we can find somebody else, right? However, when you have organized workers, right, organized cultural artists, artistic workers, who say, not as units, but as a collective, we are not going to accept anything lower than this standard of work, right? That is going to allow us to survive and allow us to build what needs to be built outside of these structures, right?
Yeah.
Until we get, yeah.
So I hear what you're saying is like you need to have in the criteria of this reform, like clarity that this is about socialism. This is clearly about, this is a reform that includes the idea that capitalism has to go, and our work has these principles in it. So while it might be a step, we're also naming capitalism as a real issue. And I see some comments here saying, basically supporting what you said. We've been taught to fear that. One thing I think you mentioned earlier, and then we're going to, I think, open up and ask people to start to share some of their work. Please start sharing some of your ideas in the chat about things that you'd like to see promoted. And we'll start promoting that as we start to go towards winding down. You mentioned this thing about neoliberalism, right? And neoliberalism to me almost becomes, the word neoliberalism almost becomes neoliberalism because it's undefinable, it's confusing, it puts you in a fugue, it's everything, it's nothing. But at the same time, in some ways, it feels like it was a whole bunch of people who created neoliberalism to avoid really talking about capital or late state or using Marxist language. So they created another language to avoid saying something that might sound too communist, frankly. Yeah. And I think that the Fred Hampton video that we showed there, I think shows the reason why we have this fear, because he's asked, what will happen to you? And Fred Hampton says, well, we will continue, right? The revolution, you can kill the revolution, but you can't kill the revolution. But I don't know that we experienced it that way. And it feels like that movie is in some ways ritualizing that the good fight that ends in death. You know what I mean? And I think I think that is something that I wonder to what extent people associate that McCarthyism or the COINTELPRO, that these things really got us afraid to even name communism or socialism. And we're fighting that now, so that you see in a lot of nonprofit work, people are naming, they would say, I don't know what the future is. I'm not going to name it socialism. I'm anti-capitalist, but I'm not going to say that's what the movement is. It's an anti-capitalist movement, but it's not necessarily a socialist movement. We don't know what that, and I know PSL would not agree with that, right? But I wonder if you have any empathy or thoughts about how that feel, what that's like. That feels like a major issue here.
Yeah, I mean, I think first, to your first comment around, explicitly outlining these principles in the work of radical reform. I think, I think most, for me, most slave rebellions were plotted and planned, in the wee hours of the nights, off of the plantation, and I think we have to take a similar understanding of, we don't need to, we don't need to show all of our cards, so to speak, right? So in the work of radical reform, having conscious, as a party, right? We're a party formation. We, and the Black Panther Party was a party formation, right? When you were organized in that way, you can go into the work of radical reform without having to broadcast all of the, step 5 or step 10, right? As Huey P. Newton would say, we want to get people from A to Z, but in the excitement, the radical excitement, we might just be talking about Z. We might just be trying to build with somebody and say, Z, we need to get to Z, but they're at B, they're at C. And I think part of that process of radical reform is knowing that we need to get to Z and not losing sight of that as we move through every single stage. And that takes organization, right? Like I said, there's no other way than folks having to sacrifice their time and labor to focus on intentionally building the black worker power right? The working class power that needs to be built. You know, I mean, I know as a teacher, right? You come home from work, you're tired, but the work still continues beyond that. As far as, you know, socialism and communism, I think, you know, it was Walter Rodney and George Jackson who said that, you know, socialism is really the reification, the coming together, the full circle transformation of society. How do I say this? Going back to communalism, right? The ways in which that we related to each other based off common property, right? Where we're not in fierce competition for survival, so we can actually have time to imagine arts, to imagine culture, recreation, right? As they did, you know, in the Soviet Union, right? The Soviet Union had one of the most cultured populations in the world because the work week was capped strictly at like 40 hours. 40 hours, that's it, you know? So then you can spend the rest of your day and the rest of your time with your family, you know, developing your human potential.
Right. Right. That's Marx's, one of his famous comments, right? That like in communism, I fish on Tuesday, I work on Wednesday, Thursday, I do this different thing. It's about creating more space and time for living a full human life. There's a question in the chat I want to get to here from Zena. And her question is, Nino, are you familiar with the Highlander Folk School from the 50s, which is still in existence? If so, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this framework and if this is another model to go back to. And again, Highlander is still in existence.
I'm not
familiar. It's in Tennessee, and it was the training school for Dr. King was there, as well as Miss Parks was there. A lot of people don't know that this school actually did a lot of the training for civil rights workers, and they weren't having spontaneous, you know, protests. They were trained organizers using tactics.
Yeah, unfortunately, my only, I mean, this is kind of endemic to the age that I've grown up in, right? My only introduction to that is, oh, that's the communist school that trained Dr. King as a communist, right? I was at first thinking of like a high school, but then I'm like, oh, that's the.
It had a major fire actually a little while ago, and so it actually needed a great deal of support. But I think this issue around philanthropy, you know, it also is doing that work, and really important work in the South. Oregon's a lot of arts workers, right? And there is that relationship, which makes that's all this. I'll get out of your way if you have more to say about Highlander.
Yeah, sorry, you froze up there for a little bit, right before you said the.
Oh, I was saying that it's still in existence. I think it also has and has produced a lot of arts workers I've had a chance to work with, very important in the South still. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if I think, and it has also had to engage philanthropy because again of this issue, and this is why I wonder about this as an issue that should be addressed. The state, the federal government, right, does not provide any real support for arts in this country. So it's a radically different nonprofit world, I would say, than education, where every year in Pittsburgh, for example, the state education budget is larger than the city budget. So if you want to be a teacher, you can work and you can have a class, you can have some of these things at least, and then go from there. As an arts worker, there is not such a apparatus, right? And I think that is a unique thing that arts workers face regarding how do I live my life? And then when the state does not even give this kind of support, except for it does it through the wealthy. The wealthy creating this other kind of version that feels like it needs examination. A bunch of people posting things about this in the chat around, I think, Highlander. Do you have more to say about Highlander?
I mean, I really wish I could say a lot more on Highlander. I mean, I think we need more Highlanders. I mean, it's unfortunate to hear about that fire. I'm not sure if there are any like GoFundMes around, rebuilding. No, I think one of the
There were. I mean, this was about a year ago that they had it, and I'm not sure where it stands right now. But it was a significant fire. It was very unfortunate because some important records were lost. So I just appreciate Zena, you shouting out Highlander, because I think it's an ongoing place where this work is happening today, and some of these issues are there. One last question before I feel we start to wrap and ask people to shout out their things is I guess, well, there's two things. One is around, I was saying to DS before this started, hey, this is gonna be a Black and brown space, right? And I was saying, I think it's important to talk to PSL about that, because there has been issues in the past with communists who feel like the race is distracting us from the class contradictions and that whole situation, and narrow nationalism. And the Black Panther Party, I think, navigated that well, right? They said we're for a multiracial piece, but at one point you did see white Black Panther Party members, right? Which I think people don't know that even was there. And I guess I just wonder, or at least that was my impression. If I had that wrong, I could be only through appearance. It looked like they had that. But what is your thought about that in terms of, in this letter that we're writing? And again, please say in the chat if you'd like to talk about this. We one of the things that we ask is, well, what's the role of white arts organizations and white artists if Black arts and arts organizations were to organize and say, we want to see these kinds of changes in support, right? Funding for Black artists and arts organizations, and we want to change some of these relationships, right? And one of the things that we mention is, well, be in support of increasing the payout rate, right? Because philanthropy has a floor; it has to go about 5%. And we're saying change the floor to 10%. At least that would reduce some of that money from capital folks and put more money in the sector. And then the point there is, if white arts organizations would support this increase, it wouldn't pit us against each other, right? Because that's one of the ways that this works, is that we end up fighting each other. But I just wonder, the last thing I'll say about this, and I'll shut up, is that some of the criticism that you've seen of communism, socialism, is that it doesn't really think about how Europeans have been racializing each other, that there's deep racist, I would say, issues within the culture. You could argue the dominant European culture has seen division and xenophobia, even it created races even amongst itself, right? And that communism doesn't really acknowledge the European culture issue that maybe Afrocentrists might bring up. And any of that you want to weigh in, I think would be appreciated, but maybe the Black and white organizing issue. And then what about the culture of European people and its own issues of racialism and communism? How do you make sense of that as a Black man, or even see it differently?
Yeah, I think that's really saved the heavy hitter for the last. I will say, the Black Panther Party, they started off as a Black nationalist organization, transformed themselves into a revolutionary nationalist organization, which really just means that they, want national liberation for Black people. They see Black people not as a race, right? Which is, I think, is what we are at pains to really finally eradicate, right? That this idea that racism is real, but the idea of race as a scientific biological concept it's not true at all, right? And much of what gives racism its current thrust really is the people who are fighting against it sometimes believe in that concept of like, well, there are races, there are different races, and it's fundamentally unsound, which is why the Panthers were dangerous, right? Because they cut through that and they said, actually, there's one race, but there are many different nationalities, and what they called white workers, white people were the mother colony radicals, right? They were part of the mother country. And another tenet of socialism that the Panthers understood is that labor in Black skin will never free itself as long as labor in white skin, or labor in white skin will never free itself as long as labor in Black skin is enchained. But also, no nation can be free as long as it oppresses other nations. Your oppression of me is the seeds of your own oppression, right? It's sowing the seeds of your own demise. And the Panthers cut through that through a program of class solidarity, through their, the first Rainbow Coalition, where they worked with organizations like the Young Patriot Party, which, it's an anomaly. Their flag was the Confederate flag with a red star in the middle, which, they later changed. But the way that it got there it was torturous, I heard a story from some movement elders about Fred Hampton going into these white bars, in Chicago, saying, I'm looking for the N-words, in this white bar. And these white workers are like, what? This is a white bar. There's no N-words here. And then Hampton says, you know, well, if you look at your conditions, you know, in Appalachia, wherever you are, like, y'all are getting, you know, over policed, gunned down, the same dirty water, the same conditions, right? As a way to speak to that material class solidarity that does exist now. And there's more of a basis now for it, right? Collaboration, because of the proletarianization, right? We have people who have PhDs who are on food stamps. We have people who have 2-3 degrees who are struggling, white and black, right? And as everyone's conditions begin to level out, right, we have two options: socialism, right, a collaborative, cooperative future where we have collective ownership of property and the means of production, or we have fascism, right, where we've seen from the January 6th incident, where, you know, we can really go there. So I think, you know, the comment about, you know, the role of white artists and the role of white, you know, political agents, you know, I think we take those political factors into account. So if you're a white artist and, you know, you have the opportunity to provide for solidarity, right? I think that solidarity has to be on a class basis. It cannot be on this liberal, you know, I'm doing you a favor basis where I think that my oppression, I'm free. If I'm white, you know, as a white person, I'm free, and I'm helping you out as an unfree person. The Panthers are saying none of y'all free. Nobody's free. We're not free. Y'all not free. And if you think you're free, then that's how you know precisely that you are not free. So I think to the white artists, you know, don't see yourself as doing us a favor. Don't see yourself as I'm using my privilege to help you out, right? But this is my duty in the fight to end the oppression and exploitation that, you know, also affects myself as well. Because you're not Jesus. We don't need you to play Jesus to help us out, right? We need you to recognize your own interests in this fight. You know, some of the European stuff, I think, I will say, maybe I can post a criticism of some of it, but I mean, you could really write a book on that, because
I'd like, yeah, I'll definitely look for that. I think because I feel like that would be that's a, you know, racial capitalism is getting to more currency. Cedric Robinson kind of gave that phrase, offered that criticism, and maybe you might share that later. People can follow Nino. You saw all those ways to do that. I'm going to call out Miracle now. We're gonna wrap. I just want to say how great I've enjoyed talking with you. We want to leave space for other people to share their work below, but it's been really been great.
Well, right on. Likewise, man. Feeling is mutual. I mean, I'm glad to be here with y'all, and yeah, I think we need more spaces like this. You know, because I mean, Black people for so many years we've been just forced to work, right? Work, and like, to me, this is reminiscent of like planning like a slave rebellion. You know, we're not in like a house in the swamp somewhere at 3 a.m. You know, but we're here and we're conversing and sharing these ideas that, yeah, I think are liberatory. You know, revolutionary ideas.
Yeah, and again, thank you so much for joining us. And what we're going to invite people to do is in the chat, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, if you go to the comment section, we can actually see your comments. So please just shout out, link out any projects that you are working on, any opportunities that you have for collaboration, as well as any supports and resources that you are in need of. What Justin and DS are working on, as they talked about, is building this Black and Brown solidarity union organizing within the southwestern Pennsylvania region. And so one of the ways that we're able to connect is if you let us know what you need, so that Justin and DS will be able to follow up with you. And so again, this is Black History Month. You know, tomorrow we are going to be honoring the life of, you know, Malcolm X, and thinking about the ways in which we build solidarity within our own communities, so that we are not fighting for resources, so that we're not having these intercultural conflicts that actually, you know, in past ways have turned violent, or if, you know, we reference Judas and the Black Messiah, have created ways that, you know, the carceral state is able to separate and segregate us so that we can harm ourselves and each other. And so we want to thank Nino. I know that there is another program that you do want to hop onto. And so, Nino, do you have any last words that you can, before you wrap up?
Thank y'all so much. I'm really humbled and grateful to be with y'all. I'll drop some things in the chat. Tomorrow, like you said, is Malcolm X, the day that Malcolm X was assassinated, stolen from us. We're actually listening to one of his speeches, The Ballad of the Bullet, tomorrow, you know, in the context of impeachment, January 6th, because, you know, it's 2021 and it's the question of the Ballad of the Bullet. So everyone's invited to come and listen to that with us and have discussion. And definitely check out Jericho Movement, Movement to Free Political Prisoners, Coalition Black Trade Unionists, Cancel the Rents Boston, and that's pretty much it. I mean, I look forward to continuing to talk with y'all, and I can't wait till this pandemic is really over, so I can actually travel and go to Pittsburgh and, like, you know, break bread with y'all, because y'all are really amazing people.
All right. Thank you, and I have a good one. You can just stop your camera, and that will take you out of the stream. And so we want to also thank Lakeisha Wolf, Becca Zala, Michelle Betts, Kendra Ross, who's also, you know, instrumental in helping Justin and DS create this new, you know, working collective, you know, this Artists Cultural Workers Union. And so DS, if you can come off mute, can you talk about some of the issues that you know that are facing artists and why it's very important to unionize or create this collective at this time?
Well, you know, we are better together. Ha ha ha. Right? We understand we're in a time period where individual contractors or independent contractors were just allowed to collect unemployment. We know distribution of funds for different federal programs has been inequitable, to say the least. Thinking about Western Pennsylvania, Allegheny County, and the state of Pennsylvania being an at-will state, you know, what happens to our elders, because not all of our elder creatives become Dick Gregory. You know, we're in a very blue-collar region. So how do we protect our blue-collar artists, working class individuals? So again, just want to give much love and respect to Michelle Betts, Kendra Ross, Becca Zalam-Gooney, Lakeisha Wolf, Justin Lang, and many more for helping to start to build conversations around these issues. And special shout out to you, Miracle, for dealing with the emails and being like, yeah, we'll rock it out. You know, we're better together.
You know, that's what we are here for as a collective, to work together. We show up for each other. And Lakeisha's in the comments saying, you know, don't forget the Ujamaa Collective have been working, you know, locally and nationally to build on Black cooperation as well. And it's very important. Again, you know, Justin brought up earlier that we're outside as artists, you know, we don't have that traditional federal support, but also we are working in a gig economy. And because of that, a lot of artists, particularly Black artists, found that they were ineligible for a lot of the supports that came with COVID, federal, state level COVID research, where we had to do mutual aid. And, you know, I know sometimes people don't like to hear communism or socialism, but, you know, it takes a village. We are the village. We are the mutual aid works. We, you know, we look out for each other, whether it is, you know, the elders providing childcare, whether it's taking people back and forth to work, whether it's signing up people to get, you know, COVID testing, vaccines, whether it's dropping off these food boxes. You know, we are the collective, and whatever word you use to show up for each other, that's what we're trying to do. So please get in contact with DS Kinsel and Justin, you know, for this program. And I also, Justin is back. And so, Justin, when you're talking about, you know, this artist collective, this gig economy, how can people reach out to be a part of this working document? And what are some of the next?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm frustrated because I couldn't put this in the comment section. So I wrote shouts to Lakeisha Wolf, Becca Zalam-Gooney, Michelle Betts, Kendra Ross, because there's a collective of us working on this, but for some reason I can only put it in the private chat.
I put it in there for you, big bro. They got it.
It's annoying me. How you can do it is DS had this great idea that we would call people up and we have this document that we want to share and get people's feedback on, and kind of do this in a slow process. So there have been conversations, and folks may even have been called, that Lakeisha and I and all those folks that is named sent an email out over the summer and said had about 40 people talking about this. But these things take some time, and it's kind of like iterating. So the next step right now is those names that were mentioned, we're going to be calling people and saying, here's this document that kind of frames out, like, here's the case for a collective, a union. Here are the things that we think we need, right? And what do you think about that? Do you think it's the right way to go? And we have the issues of, like, Michelle Betts' whole frameworks around, like, due structures and what that could cost. And, you know, like Lakeisha is doing a whole study, Ujima is doing a whole thing around a variety of cooperative economic models. And I do think that that what Nino's offering, though, is an interesting challenge, right? Which is naming explicitly socialism as what you're about, what you're doing. And what do Black cultural folks think about that? Is Ujima, is that the same frame of that? I don't mean Ujima collective, I mean the fourth principle of the Nguzo Saba. So next steps, Miracle, is we're going to be reaching out to the folks that we have. Please put your name in either the YouTube or the Facebook or this chat right here if you'd like to be contacted. And those folks that I just named are going to be reaching out, having conversations over the next month or so.
Hey, should we do this again?
Yeah, I think so. We're better together, you said, right? Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One comment from Baba Anthony Mitchell, you know, and what he said was he felt like this needed to be done. And he said with a broader community engagement. I wasn't sure what, Baba, you meant by community, right? But I wasn't sure what that meant, right? But I'm curious what that means. You know, back in the day, we used to have the ancient African history class every Tuesday night at the Homewood Library in the 90s. And it was always public conversation around all kinds of things. I definitely feel like, you know, right now we have this. It'd be great when we get back live to do more public discussions and things like that. So please, in terms of next steps, those people, look out for them to give you a holler. If they ask to talk with you, please be willing to have a conversation.
So we're going to end this off with a thank you to our ASL interpreters. Much appreciation, much respect. And we have a short video, 2 minutes long, from Chairman Hampton on racism and capitalism. So you can stick around for the video. You can sign off, say goodbye now. But we want to just end some words, and I'm getting a hold up, DS, hold up.
We want to talk about, so Glashonda, who is on your screen right now, who is signing, actually runs an organization, Cocoa LLC. I believe I said that right. That provides interpretation, closed captioning, that includes Black and Brown people, as well as other not marginalized, but other people who can provide captioning and translation services, particularly BIPOC individuals. And so we know a lot of times we have failed, to be honest, in making accessible media and communications. And as we're trying to correct some of those past harms and wrongs, we want to also thank Glashonda for being here. We'll put their contact information as well in the chat, so you can reach out to them. But they have a network of folks who are able to provide closed captioning, who are able to provide ASL interpretation if you or your organization would like particularly Black and Brown individuals to hire Black and Brown individuals. So we want to thank Glashonda and her team. We know they are based out in Texas, and there's a lot of stuff going on. So we want to thank them for coming on and spending these couple of hours with us to build community and solidarity and ensure we're able to make this program as accessible as possible. And without further ado, we're going to end with Brother Fred Hampton, but look for their contact information in the chat. Thank you so much. And Klashana, did you want to speak, to come off mute and say anything about your organization? No, that was good. I did it right. I did you justice. Okay, perfect. So without further ado, listen to Brother Fred Hampton.
What makes them mad about it? What makes them mad about it is that they had black people and white poor people and red poor people and Puerto Rican poor people and Latin American Puerto Rican people of poor people of all descent. They had them caught up in movements based on racism when the Black Panther Party stood up and said that we don't care what anybody says. We don't think you fight fire with fire best. We think you fight fire with water best. We're going to fight racism, not racism, but we're going to fight with solidarity. We said we're not going to fight capitalism with black capitalism, but we're going to fight it with socialism. We stood up and said we're not going to fight reactionary pigs and reactionary state's attorneys like this and reactionary state's attorneys like Hanrahan with any other reactions on our part. We're going to fight their reactions where all of us people are getting together and have an international proletarian revolution. Right on. And that's saying all power to the people. That's saying that no matter what color you are, you're just only two classes. And that's saying there's a class over here and there's a class over there. And the reason that this class over here has never did anything to get this class off its back because this is lower, this is upper. This is the oppressed, this is the oppressor. This is the exploited, this is the exploiter. And these people in this class have divided themselves. They say, I'm black and I hate white people. I'm white and I hate black people. I'm Latin American and I hate hillbillies. I'm hillbilly and I hate Indians. So we fight amongst each other. And you've heard the testimony of pigs here. You got pigs of all colors, you know that. You got pigs that are white, you got pigs that are black, you even got pigs that are black and white. Propagating the same type of madness that this buffoon Hanrahan would be propagating if he were here himself. And why? Because they want to keep you to believing that I'm your enemy, and that everybody else that's black and that wears a lot of hair on his head and hair on his face, they want to keep you thinking that he's your enemy. Why? Because if ever you would disregard him and overlook him just for a minute and throw away that question of racism and start to dealing with a little logic, then there would be no one else you could attack other than Hanrahan, other than Davy, and other than Tricky Dicky Nixon. If you make the right decisions, then the oppressed people of the world will get complete satisfaction. I know you return a verdict of not guilty.